It began like any other talk show night. Bright lights, big laughs, applause signs blinking above an eager crowd ready for entertainment, not enlightenment. But what unfolded wasn't comedy. It was something no one saw coming. The host was famous for two things: her sharp wit and her unapologetic disdain for faith. She didn't just question belief, she made a brand out of mocking it. Week after week, guests were roasted, ridiculed, and turned into trending clips for the internet to feast on. And tonight she had a new guest, Keanu Reeves. He walked onto the set with that same calm presence people had always admired. Humble, quiet, polite. But what no one realized was that behind that silence was something unshakable. The interview started soft, safe questions, light banter. Then she leaned forward, eyes sparkling with practiced sarcasm. "So, Keanu," she said with a grin, "you really still wear that cross?" The audience chuckled. Keanu nodded gently. "Yes." "Wow," she said, dragging the word like it tasted sour. "You're really still clinging to fairy tales?" Laughter erupted. Not kind laughter, cruel, performative. A room full of people trained to jeer at something they didn't understand. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. He didn't defend. He didn't debate. He just sat there. Still. Quiet. And for a moment, the room shifted. The host wasn't finished. "So what is it?" She pushed, smiling for the camera. "Magic man in the sky? Fire insurance for the afterlife? Or do you just like the necklace?" Bigger laughter this time. Applause. Keanu remained still, his hands folded, his cross visible, his gaze gentle, and then silence. It wasn't part of the show. The laughter died too fast. Something unseen had entered the room. The host blinked, unsettled. For the first time, she wasn't sure who held the power. Because in a world addicted to shouting, one man's silence had just pierced through the noise. No argument, no comeback, just presence. And what followed would become one of the most talked about moments in live television history. The cameras kept rolling. The laughter had died down, but the show had only just begun. The host adjusted in her seat, her smile still polished, but her tone now sharp, edged, with something darker. She leaned forward again, sensing vulnerability in Keanu's silence and mistaking it for weakness. "You know, you're kind of a mystery to people," she said, eyes narrowing. "Action hero, philosopher, but a believer? I mean, come on." The audience chuckled again, some nervously. Keanu didn't move, he just offered a small knowing smile. "Faith isn't always loud," he said calmly. "Isn't it though?" She shot back, flipping her cue cards with flair. "Seems like it's always trying to tell everyone else how to live." A few claps, some whistles. She was building momentum now, playing to the crowd, not the guest. "So what is it, Keanu?" She continued, voice tinged with mock sincerity. "Are you afraid? Or is this just your way of staying relevant with the spiritual crowd?" The insult was subtle, wrapped in performance. But the intent? Brutal. The studio lights felt hotter. A camera panned to audience faces, some uncomfortable, others amused. The crew shifted in their chairs behind the glass, unsure whether they were watching an interview or an ambush. Keanu finally looked up, eyes steady. "I don't need relevance," he said simply, and that was it. No defense, no counterattack. But that response, so direct, so unbothered, landed differently, like a stone tossed into still water. The host tilted her head. "That's the best you've got?" she said with a smirk. "You really came on this show wearing a cross and no backup plan?" Gasps echoed faintly in the back row. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a spectacle. A clash between a woman intoxicated by her platform and a man rooted in something deeper than cameras and clout. And as the show cut to commercial break, the host leaned back in her chair, triumphant. She thought she'd won. The audience thought so too. Twitter lit up in real time with memes, clips, hashtags mocking the quiet actor who didn't clap back. But what none of them knew was that silence was not surrender. It was the sound of something much bigger, beginning to move. The silence was thick, lingering like a cloud in the studio after the cameras stopped rolling. The host leaned back, a smug grin creeping across her face as the crew scurried about. She had her victory, but Keanu didn't flinch, not a single move. "You were quiet," she had taunted him in front of millions. "You didn't answer me." In the, days that followed, the world seemed to turn against him. The hashtag #Keanu silence trended on Twitter, but not in the way he would have hoped. The memes, the mockery, it all built up. The host's comments reverberated across late-night shows, news segments, and comedy specials. It was the perfect storm for public humiliation. A silent man standing against a roaring tide of cynicism. The host's name was on every headline. Her monologue was replayed over and over. Her ratings soared. And Keanu? He was relegated to a side note in pop culture history. On the surface, it looked like he had lost. Like the host had won this round, no argument, no defense. The world sided with her, laughing at Keanu's mysterious silence. The ratings fueled the narrative. The host was right. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. Emails flooded in. Media outlets requested follow-up interviews. They wanted Keanu's side, wanted to hear him break his silence. They begged for something, anything that would feed the beast of public spectacle. But Keanu refused. He stayed out of the spotlight, stayed quiet, stayed undisturbed. And the host? Well, her arrogance grew. She doubled down on her mockery, appearing on more talk shows, taking aim at Keanu, calling his silence a coward's retreat. "Maybe he should have come prepared," she said with a bite. "Maybe he should have answered the question like an adult." The more she pushed, the more she painted him into a corner. Her behavior wasn't just about entertainment anymore, it was personal. She needed him to respond, needed to prove to the world that her power, the power she wielded over millions of viewers, was absolute. The public fell in line, eager for the next jab, the next insult. The clickbait headlines couldn't get enough. "Keanu cowers before the host," they wrote. "Keanu's faith just a joke," another screamed. But even as they hammered him, Keanu remained unmoved, silent. Not because he was weak, but because he knew something the world had forgotten. Silence could be the loudest statement of all. But with every word she spat, the host crossed a line. She pushed him, mocked him, until she'd made a mistake. She didn't realize she had given him exactly what he needed, the space to reclaim his power. The studio lights shone bright again, the cameras rolling, and the world watched, waiting for the next installment of the drama. This was supposed to be just another episode of the talk show, a night of glitz, glamour, and light-hearted banter. But this time, it was different. Keanu Reeves wasn't just another guest. He was the subject of ridicule. "He's back," the host announced, her voice dripping with the kind of mockery that only a true media heavyweight could wield. The crowd cheered. Keanu stepped onto the stage, his presence instantly commanding. He walked to his chair with the same calm composure he had displayed during their first encounter, but this time, something was heavier in the air. Something had shifted. As he sat down, the host smiled, a gleam in her eye. "Keanu, we all saw your silence," she said. "So tell us, why did you really stay quiet?" The question wasn't an inquiry, it was an accusation, a pointed jab at his character. Her words echoed across the studio, mocking the very thing he had held sacred, his faith. His silence was turned into a weapon against him. The audience chuckled nervously, anticipating his response. I'm not sure," Keanu replied, his voice steady, but there was a tightness to it now. His discomfort was subtle, but unmistakable. His faith had become the punchline, and he felt the weight of that, the sting of being misunderstood, of being mocked for something deeply personal. The host didn't let up. "You know, many people out there are wondering if you're just playing the martyr." She leaned forward, watching him, waiting for his reaction. "Are you just hiding behind your faith? Is this a publicity stunt?" The studio seemed to hold its breath as Keanu sat still, staring at her, as if searching for the right words. But the crowd had already made their judgments. To them, his silence was just weakness, just a way to avoid a fight he didn't want to win. The laughter rippled across the room. Keanu could hear the mocking tone in their voices, feel the weight of their judgment. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The ridicule, the venom in the air. It was too much. This was the moment he dreaded. His faith, his silence, his very essence had been weaponized by the media. He wasn't the hero anymore. He wasn't the man people admired for his resilience or his values. He was the fool. The joke and the host? She reveled in it. Her victory was all but sealed. The audience clapped, laughed, and cheered. Keanu was the punchline, his dignity stripped away on live television. His heart sank, but he kept his gaze fixed, unable to break. The host basked in her win, her smug smile never fading. But Keanu, despite the crushing weight of humiliation, knew one thing. This moment wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning. Keanu Reeves sat in the same chair, under the same blinding lights in front of millions of viewers. The studio buzzed with whispers, the air thick with tension after the public ridicule he had faced just moments ago. The laughter had faded, but the echoes of mockery lingered. Yet something had changed. Something had shifted. For the first time, Keanu didn't feel the weight of the audience's judgment. The eyes that had once scrutinized him were no longer as sharp. A quiet confidence began to stir within him, something deeper than the pain he had just endured. It was a truth he had kept hidden for years, a secret he'd guarded more fiercely than anything else in his life. And now it was ready to surface. As the host turned to him again, her smile less gleeful now, more calculated, she asked another probing question. "You've been silent so far, Keanu. But I think people deserve to hear the truth. What are you hiding?" There it was. The pressure was building again, but this time Keanu wasn't going to buckle under it. He could feel the gaze of the world upon him, the prying eyes of an industry that thrived on revealing secrets. But he wasn't just going to play along anymore. This wasn't about playing the game. This was about setting the record straight. Keanu's eyes darkened, and for a moment, it seemed as if he was preparing to tell a different kind of truth. Not the one the host wanted to hear, but the one he had carried inside for far too long. "I never asked for this kind of attention," Keanu began, his voice softer now, but the calmness in it made the studio still. "But the truth is, I'm not hiding anything from the world. I've just been waiting for the right moment to say something that matters." The host blinked, clearly not prepared for this response. Keanu paused, gathering his thoughts, the weight of his words pressing against his chest. This wasn't a celebrity confession or a publicity stunt. This was something far more personal. "My faith isn't just something I believe in. It's something I live by. It's not a label I wear. It's a practice I embody every single day." A hush fell over the audience. The host, once brimming with sarcasm, now appeared unsure. She glanced at the cue cards, trying to regain control of the interview, but it was already slipping from her grasp. The power dynamic had started to tilt. Keanu's words weren't just a declaration. They were a challenge. A challenge to the culture of mockery, to the relentless need to reduce something sacred to a joke. In that moment, he wasn't just defending his faith. He was speaking up for all those who had been silenced in the name of entertainment. His revelation wasn't just about his personal beliefs. It was a quiet rebellion against the toxic culture that had mocked him for so long. And the world for the first time began to listen, not because of his fame, but because of the quiet strength in his voice. As the host stood frozen, unsure how to respond, the camera shifted to the audience, whose faces showed a growing respect for the man they had once ridiculed. The tides had turned. Keanu's revelation was a subtle shift, a soft breeze that had started to move through the room, barely noticeable at first, but powerful enough to challenge the force of the storm he had been caught in. The host, still reeling from the unexpected turn of the conversation, tried to regain control of the situation. I'm not sure I understand, Keanu. You're telling me your faith is your power? Her words were laced with skepticism, but beneath it, there was a flicker of uncertainty. She had built her career on confrontation and dissection, but this was different. Keanu met her gaze, his calm demeanor still unwavering. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to argue. No, it's not about power, it's about peace. It's about being at peace with who you are, even when the world tries to tell you you're something you're not. The host's face hardened. She wasn't prepared for this. In a world where everything was a game of manipulation and spectacle, Keanu's sincerity was like a punch to the gut. But she wasn't about to back down. But we're in a world where people fight for what they believe in, Keanu. Where is your fight? Her voice had started to rise, but Keanu's response was slow, deliberate, and cutting through her attempts to regain control. My fight is here, in this moment. I'm not fighting you. I'm not fighting anyone. It was like a declaration of war against the system itself. The system that had tried to reduce him to a mere caricature for its entertainment. He wasn't going to play along anymore. And even though the host could sense the shift, she couldn't control it. The tension in the room was palpable. The audience, once on edge, had begun to murmur. There was something in the air, a sense that they had witnessed a pivotal moment. Keanu wasn't just reclaiming his faith. He was reclaiming his dignity, his right to exist on his own terms. The host, now visibly flustered, attempted to steer the conversation back to something she could control. But your silence, it's not helping anyone. People want answers. People want explanations. They want you to explain yourself. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. The silence is the answer. Maybe it's time people start listening to it. For the first time, Keanu wasn't just a guest on the show. He was the one in control. The power was shifting, slowly, quietly but undeniably. The studio had never felt more electric. The tension that simmered beneath the surface of the conversation was no longer subtle. It was palpable, thick enough to cut through. The host, once confident in her control over the situation, now found herself grasping at the edges of her authority, her carefully cultivated persona starting to crumble under the weight of Keanu's quiet resolve. You're not answering the question, Keanu, she said, her voice tight, almost frantic. You're avoiding the conversation. Keanu remained calm, his eyes steady and unwavering, a silent force of nature that she couldn't seem to crack. I'm not avoiding the conversation. I'm inviting it, he replied softly, his words cutting through the noise of her panic. But it's not about me. It's about you and everyone else who's caught in this rush to be louder, faster, more. Her eyes flashed with frustration. This was not the narrative she was prepared to defend. She had built her career on making people talk, making them react, making them fight. But now Keanu's presence was a challenge to that very premise. You think you're teaching people something by being silent? You think that's a solution? She scoffed, her disbelief turning to a kind of sneering aggression. People need answers, Keanu. They need to understand why you're so different, why you don't fight back. Keanu's response was measured, and yet it had a bite, a quiet intensity that spoke volumes without raising his voice. Maybe it's because I'm tired of fighting. Maybe it's because I've learned that some battles don't require me to pick up arms. Maybe I've learned that true power comes from peace, not from dominance. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a moment where even the audience could feel the stakes rising. Keanu wasn't just defending himself. He was challenging everything the host stood for. He was questioning her method of conflict, her method of control, and he was doing it with nothing more than stillness, quiet defiance, and a presence that no flashy retort or sharp critique could outdo. The host's face reddened as her frustration mounted. She leaned in, her voice now rising in volume, trying to reassert her dominance. You think the world's going to change because of a few quiet words? This isn't a fairy tale, Keanu. People don't listen to silence. Keanu's eyes held hers with a silent, unwavering gaze. Maybe that's the problem. People are so caught up in the noise, they've forgotten what silence has to teach us. A collective breath held in the studio. the audience hanging on every word, caught between the fierce energy of the host and the quiet power of Keanu's defiance. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It had become a battleground of ideals, and Keanu was no longer just the guest. He was the one leading the charge. The confrontation in the studio had reached a boiling point. The host's veneer of control was slipping away faster than she could regain it. The studio, once an arena of laughter and lighthearted banter, now felt like a courtroom, with Keanu as both the defendant and the judge. The audience, who had once eagerly awaited the drama to unfold, now sat in quiet anticipation. There was something in the air, an energy that couldn't be ignored. The host, visibly shaken by the quiet power that Keanu wielded, tried to regain her composure. She glanced at the clock, the minutes slipping away as she realized the interview was no longer about entertainment. It had become a matter of personal pride, her ego clashing with the unshakable calm of her guest. "You still haven't answered why you think you're the moral authority here," she challenged, attempting to regain control. "You think your silence makes you superior?" But as her words left her lips, something unexplainable happened. A brief flicker of light, a glitch, and then complete silence. The audience went still, their collective breath held in that unexpected moment. The studio was plunged into a near blackness, the air thick with confusion. No sound, no lights, no movement. Only the absolute stillness that had become the defining characteristic of Keanu's presence. For 10 seconds, the world seemed to pause. Even the host, in her desperate attempt to regain her footing, found herself frozen, eyes wide in disbelief. The crew, unsure whether to intervene, looked to their monitors, but nothing worked. There was no sound, no signal, just an unnerving silence that stretched on forever. The audience, usually quick to react, could only wait. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the silence was broken. The lights flickered back on, the sound returned, and the screens refreshed, but the energy in the room was undeniably different. The host, who had been a force of interruption and mockery, now sat in stunned silence, her face pale, her breath shaky, as if she had seen something that couldn't be explained. She turned to Keanu, her voice barely a whisper. What just happened? Her eyes, once filled with arrogance and challenge, now reflected something else, something unnameable. Keanu, unfazed by the glitch, simply looked at her with the same quiet certainty he had all along. "It wasn't about winning a debate," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It was about touching a soul." The host blinked, as if trying to understand the depth of his words. Her eyes welled up, not from fear but from something deeper, something stirring within her, something she hadn't felt in years. In that brief, inexplicable moment of silence, she had been forced to confront herself, her motives, her life's work. It wasn't about mocking Keanu anymore. It wasn't about winning. It was about truth. And in that truth, she realized she had been wrong all along. The audience sat in stunned silence, not knowing how to react. They had expected a fight, a clash, something dramatic. But what they had just witnessed was something entirely different. A moment of reckoning. The host, the once powerful figure, had been humbled in a way no words, no argument, no public humiliation could have achieved. As the silence hung in the air, the host finally spoke again, her voice shaking with emotion. "I don't know what that was, but I think I've just learned something." And in that moment, the world saw something incredible unfold, not in the form of words, but in the quiet power of a single, profound truth. Keanu Reeves had never needed to fight. He had simply needed to be. The studio, now filled with a profound and almost eerie silence, had shifted completely. What began as a live broadcast filled with mockery and arrogance had transformed into something far more complex. Keanu, the very symbol of humility and quiet strength, had unknowingly, or perhaps intentionally, pulled the rug out from under the host. The moment of reckoning had arrived, but the true fallout was just beginning to unfold. As the crew scrambled to fix technical issues, the host sat in a daze, her face drained of all color. Her earlier bravado, her biting remarks, her smirks, gone. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. No longer was she the all-knowing figure behind the mic. She was now exposed for her arrogance and dismissiveness, her sense of superiority shattered in front of millions. The audience, once her cheering section, had become spectators to her fall from grace. "Cut the broadcast," she muttered under her breath, her voice strained and raw. But her command was no longer met with the usual obedient clicks and nods from the crew. They had witnessed the same moment of transformation she had. There was no returning to the old ways now. The damage had been done. It was no longer about ratings or viewership. This was about something far bigger: personal reckoning. Behind the cameras, the executives who had once praised her cutting-edge style of sharp commentary and provocative statements were now questioning their own decisions. They watched the scene unfold, a once unstoppable force, now a fragile figure, a woman who had thought she could control the narrative, now at its mercy. The moment of grace, the glitch, the silence, had unraveled everything she had built. The network was quick to act. Within hours, statements flooded the media. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the talk show has been suspended indefinitely. The host, once a household name, had been quietly removed from the show. The ratings spike from the scandal had given the network enough of a temporary bump to justify the decision to sever ties. But it wasn't the public apology that would mark the true fallout. No, that came later, as the host began her own personal journey of reflection. She realized that her pride, her unyielding need to be right, had been her undoing. In the weeks that followed, the media continued to talk about her fall. The narrative they created was no longer one of her power or influence. It was about the humanity she had ignored, the humility she had overlooked. Keanu, however, went on as if nothing had changed. The very humility that had disarmed the host remained his constant companion. His faith, his quiet resolve, and his understanding of the bigger picture continued to inspire millions. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't need the apologies. His truth had already been spoken. And for the host, her journey, though marked by public humiliation, was the beginning of something profound. The truth that had come crashing into her world didn't just humble her in that moment. It began to reshape her. Her time of dominance had ended, but it had also paved the way for a new chapter in her life, one where, perhaps for the first time, she would be truly free to find herself again, without the need for mockery, cruelty, or false superiority. The scene opens with the soft hum of a quiet city street at dusk. A light breeze swirls leaves across the pavement and the world feels remarkably still. It's the kind of peace that's almost unsettling in its simplicity. The camera slowly zooms in on a figure walking along the path. Keanu Reeves, his back to the camera, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the setting sun. His steps are slow, deliberate, unhurried. As he walks, the camera lingers on the cross around his neck, the symbol of his faith, a quiet yet powerful presence. The voice of the narrator enters, soft yet resonant, weaving together the threads of everything that has come before. There are moments in life that change us, though we may not always see them for what they are. For Keanu Reeves, the silence on that stage was never about him. It was about something much bigger. It was about reminding us all of what it means to be truly present in this world. The moment when the lights flickered, when time seemed to stop, and the host, her arrogance shattered, found herself face to face with something much greater than herself. The moment when silence spoke louder than any words could. In a world where noise is constant, where opinions are louder than understanding, where speed and distractions drown out meaning, Keanu's quiet strength became a beacon. It was a call to stop just for a moment and listen. The host now sits alone in her dressing room, the makeup stripped away, her eyes tired but thoughtful. Her face is no longer the confident smirk it once was, but a softer, more reflective expression. She gazes out the window as if searching for something just beyond the horizon. Her story is a reminder that even those who wield the most power can find themselves lost in the noise. That even in the midst of all the shouting, it's possible to miss the most important truth, the one that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room. A shot of a church steeple appears on the screen, followed by a bustling city square. then a quiet library filled with readers, each one engrossed in their own world. Slowly, the voice returns, not just as a reflection on the events that transpired, but as a deeper commentary on what it means to find peace in a chaotic world. Keanu didn't need to argue. He didn't need to win. What he showed us is that faith isn't about making others believe what we believe. It's about living in a way that speaks to something deeper in us all. A truth that, when it's ready, doesn't need our help to be heard. The final shot lingers on Keanu standing alone by the edge of a tranquil lake, watching the water ripple with the setting sun's reflection. There's no grand speech, no dramatic flourish, just the simple presence of a man at peace. The host's silence, Keanu's unwavering faith, and the world's collective moment of stillness, they are all a reminder. A reminder that in a world full of noise, sometimes the greatest power lies in the quiet. The scene fades to black as the sound of the water lapping gently at the shore echoes one final time. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more awesome content.